drop your thing there. That,
Thanks.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning. All right, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving the agenda for today's meeting, please say aye. Opposed? The abstentions? The motion carries. I'll entertain a motion for approval of minutes from the March 26th meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Real quick, I noticed that, and they're all good. I just noticed that it was interesting that you added, whoever did, was this you, Bob?
Yeah.
Added the answers to the questions, which I thought was a nice, a nice add to it. So when these get posted, people who might be interested, that was pretty good. So any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving the minutes from the March 26th meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is public comments. We have no one here in the room. And not want to take comments from the people that are attending virtually. So seeing none, we'll move to the next item on the agenda, and that's a review and discussion of the April 2025 monthly financials. As we've done in the past, we will go page by page, and we will discuss any items that come up for discussion. So if you please pull up the report, let's start at the beginning. And noting that positive variance to budget for April for $70,000. Any questions on the first page? All right, moving to the second page, the operating account summary. It's been pretty much stable and consistent for and for those who either attending virtually or would watch this meeting later on, we are looking at the April end of year budget that's unaudited. Just as a reminder, the audit doesn't happen until mid-June, and we get the results by the end of June, early July. So this is an unaudited end of year report. The next page next on the report is the operating results. Any comments, questions on that one? Okay, I have two questions on there. One, if you look on the Public Works side, on the expense side, you'll see repairs and maintenance of $57,000. Just wanted to know if that was something that was an emergency repair, standard operating, or planned. So just a question I would have as to what involved that level of expense. All right, and the same can be said for rec and parks. If you look on the expense side under other costs, it's $14,000. Question would be, what is that? And I would want to add that to our list of questions. All right, any other comments on the operating results page? All right, seeing none, we'll move forward to the next page, which is net operating by department. Okay. Anyone? This is going to be another one of the meetings where I tend to do all the talking. All right, good. Anyway, under general maintenance, it's over by $35K. If you look at the general maintenance line. But it is, if you look at the year-to-date last year, okay, the very far right column, $700K, and the year-to-date actuals so far, it's $744. And it was budgeted at $710. So the question there is that something, again, it goes back to my inquiries, was that something that was planned? Was it something that was an emergency spend? Or just part of, the general operation? In other words, and again, let me preface some of my questions. I'm always thinking in terms of what was budgeted, what actually happened, and what should be considered, for next year's budget. So when we're going through the budget cycle for next year, we look at these, discrepancies and say, and they're not bad. They're just saying that, is that something that came up? We can explain away, say, for example, an emergency purchase that needed to happen or emergency repair that needed to be happened that wasn't planned. Sure, the budget has to be flexible enough to handle those kinds of things. So again, it's just a question, not a kind of, negative comment. And then same thing on the net ops by department. I would point out the aquatics line. If you look at that, that's a significant change. If you look at the year-to-date budget, they were budgeted last year to lose $100,000. They were $3,700 to the good. This year, they were budgeted to lose $68,000 and they're $2,200 to the good. They're in the black after being budgeted to lose money. Significant in my mind. That is someone, between John, the folks at the aquatics team, the programs are doing something is going right there, which is really, really good. And I just wanted to point that out, that's a significant change in the right direction. Any other questions, comments on net ops by department? Okay, moving on to the next page, operating summary. Okay, well, if you look, expenses in services and supplies. That's interesting. If you look at the, what was budgeted, which if you look what was budgeted last year, they're pretty much close. They're close. But we budgeted 2.2. Our year-to-date actual expenses are 2.3, so it's 140K of additional expenses overall in service and maintenance. And it goes back to the question, emergency, unplanned.
I sent you a bunch of questions there.
They are right
So
here.
you're moving along pretty fast. When do they get introduced into this conversation?
Whenever you.
You're blasting through, places that,
All right,
and I gotta tell you, I primarily work at the summary level.
yeah.
I really don't like to get into the nitty gritty unless you guys do, and that's fine with me. But I don't want to tell John how to manage his job.
No, these are
Right.
I agree.
So I'm always dealing at the summary level. So I don't know, and since this is my first time doing this with you guys,
Mhm.
on an annual basis, going through the annual numbers, when do you want to go through this stuff? 'Cause
Well,
this is where I was.
right now, so I printed out your questions right here. So you're right on cue. With budget positive variance revenues versus expenses of 472K and the actuals revenue of 1.06 million, why was it necessary to increase assessments by $25, generating an additional 162K in revenue?
Boy, you talk fast. Yeah, you really, okay, basically what I'm saying is that there's a couple variances there, one to budget and one actual to actual. And we keep coming up in a positive vein in terms of revenues. Well, when you look at that, you scratch your head and you say, okay, John and Phil, right? The treasurer? Who's our treasurer?
Mark, Steve Phillips.
Steve, yeah. Phil's the guy at the county, I'm sorry. Anyway, Steve, and as they're doing great jobs, but I get confused primarily because I'm Irish, but I get confused because when I see these positive variances and then they come back with, well, we got to increase our dues, our rate, our dues to our folks, to the lot owners, by $25. And what I indicated to Doug was that we're increasing revenues by, my guess, about 162,000 by increasing the assessments by $25.
Mhm.
And I'm using 6,500 lots as to get to that number. So it might be small, it may not be the right number. What the question to me is, why are we increasing rates, increasing revenues when we have all of this revenue surplus, both on the budget side and on the actual side? 1 million on the actual side, and what was the number on the budget side? It was
So I think right now it's a
five
million.
hundred some odd now?
It's $1 million on the budget side.
Million on the actual numbers. But just looking at the budget, it was, 472,000.
Right, favorable to budget, okay? Not-
With
not
budget
actual.
positive variance of 472,000.
Yeah. Yeah, that's favorable to budget. And-
Yeah, that's budget, their
Yeah.
budget.
Yeah, that's not a real
N-
audited
to me-
number,
To me,
actually,
a
yeah.
budget is a management
yeah,
tool
exactly.
that John and the treasurer use just to see how things are going.
Yeah,
It's actual numbers that really matter.
Well,
That's the real cash flow.
other comments? Jack's question?
So I don't want to beat a dead horse. I mean, we can let it go, but
All right,
I'm just curious about it.
Bob,
Problem is, are they budgeting for that profit, that level? And if the revenue doesn't come in, then you have a shortfall. And if you don't budget to cover for the shortfall, you're gonna be in negative.
Well, we can't live with woulda, coulda, shoulda. I mean, if we're gonna budget by what could happen, that's one thing, but it should be, put out there in black and white. We are increasing revenues because we don't think we're going to generate this much income or revenue because of whatever. And that's fine. I can understand that. That's management.
let me throw one thing out there. So a couple of things I think are in play that also need to be considered, and that's the reserve study. When you look, that was done, and the first one was done in 21, I think in 23 or 4, they did the DMA Light study. And, if you looked at the reserve study, it projects out, the useful life of any particular asset and the replacement costs, estimated replacement costs. So one of the things that you have to look at is at least in my mind, is if you know that something on your asset list is going to be deemed a necessary replacement by the study, then you need a budget for that. So that at the end of the day, those are additional funds that would need to be added to the reserve to cover that expense going forward. So I think a lot of it is future proofing, on the reserve side. I'm a big proponent of having the right amount of reserves. When I was on the board, one of the things we really pushed for, and John and his team has delivered wholeheartedly, is that we wanted to make sure that we had X amount percentage in our reserves, compared to the asset base. So I think we're now up to 25%. I think the goal was to get to, and Steve put a spreadsheet together at the beginning of the budget cycle that said if he's projecting out, what the DMA study said that we need to invest, and then where the potential balances at the end of the year for the reserves would be. So I think that's another part of looking at it and saying, future proofing might not be the right word, but I think you're looking ahead saying, I want to make sure that we have enough in our reserves.
Well, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that $1.6 million net, $1.6 million net on our operation needs to be increased by $162,000 because something may happen in the future that we don't know
I
about.
think that remains to be seen, because remember, these are unaudited numbers, all right? So these are unaudited numbers. So these retained earnings don't hit the budget until after the audit, And if you look at the budget, and as a matter of fact, if you look on the first page, you can see where I believe it was $913,000 was moved from retained earnings into the budget and into certain parts of the reserves, because that's what John's looking at, saying, okay, I can't act on these retained earnings until they become real, until they become actuals. So you'll look at that and say, at the end of the day, with where we are, and this, people might get upset, but where we are with regard to our assessment, I think it's right in line with not only the current operating environment, but considerations of the future operating environment. So
So you're thinking that money eventually makes its way towards the reserve for capital jobs?
well, it would be reserved for replacement, for bulkhead, for drainage, new capital, and any other things. I mean, the worst thing to me that can happen to a budget is an unplanned expense, where something major happens, and even if it's an event that requires insurance coverage, maybe the insurance doesn't cover everything and you gotta, so unplanned expenses are one of those things. But yeah, of course, reduction of absurdity, right? Well, I'm gonna I'm gonna budget for $1 million worth of unplanned expenses. Well, no.
So
you can't really do
the
that.
answer to my question is we're increasing rates because, we're not quite sure what's gonna happen in the future. That's what I'm hearing.
I think before we claim that to be the final answer,
Oh.
I'll pose it to John, and just say, hey,
You know, I've already posted to John, and what I got back was for public safety. And that's all, public safety.
Yeah,
Not police, not fire, not what within public safety, but just public
yeah,
safety.
and that makes sense, because if you look at,
Well, no, it doesn't make sense.
sure it does.
What in public safety?
Well, I mean,
For a new employee?
I'll go back to the GM report from the last board meeting the other day. And if you look, John's put together a, kind of how much was spent over the past years in safety, okay, which would include fire, EMS, police, and any other regulatory requirements for running an operation. And the assessment now went from somewhere in the 20% range, and it's almost 44% of the assessment is dealing with safety, as a kind of a global. So there's more of a focus on safety, at least at this point. That's what I'm getting. So when I look at that report from, the GM, I look at it and say, okay, so we're investing more in safety, which I don't think anybody would argue that's a bad thing. So.
But we don't know what that means. So I'm just trying to be specific.
Yeah.
What do we mean by public safety? Are we talking about buying a fire truck or giving them a loan to buy a fire truck or whatever?
Well,
Or hire a policeman?
yeah, I was gonna say, so if you look at from 2 years ago, when the police staffing was we were way understaffed, that has been changed. So now our expenses for personnel for the police department has gone up. All right, so therefore we've had, that is an additional investment in safety, at a very kind of high
Well,
level.
shouldn't we know that?
Yeah,
I don't know.
we could get, yeah, I mean, I, for one, I'm more like you when it comes to the high level. In other words, you say safety, I'm just assuming, and I think it's a valid assumption, that it's police and, police, fire, EMS, and any other kinds of, requirements due to running a business with, like this. So, I mean, if we have to have the level of detail, okay, fine, but, I, for one, as long as there's no, outrageous number, then, I'm okay with it. So, but
Well, again.
let's post it
I
to
mean,
John again and say.
That's the Tom Terry, model of, yeah. Come on now, $25 is not gonna hurt anybody. But you gotta multiply it by the number of people that it impacts.
I'll tell you what, let's do this, Jack. I'll take that.
We'll drop it. No,
No,
we'll
there's
just
no reason to drop. No,
drop
you've got
it.
me interested. Let me take a look at it and ask John and see what he thinks, because we might be, kind of missing the point a little bit, and I think it's valid. I mean, we're here not only to, I guess, review, scrutinize, ask questions, but to learn as well, learn a philosophy of, how, the current finance team, addresses budgeting, an operational environment for this place. So.
Yeah. Bob, you were gonna say something?
No,
Well,
the only thing I was gonna say is the police department all last year was understaffed. They had to increase in salaries to stop losing people. And they gave them each a cruiser to take homes because they're on call if they
Yeah.
call them out, so they're ready to go. And that's costly.
See, I don't have a problem with any of that and anything that you guys are saying. It's just that it's a guess. It's unknown. You guys are saying, well, we think that it's for this or it's for that. And I thought that our job was that if we see something that, perhaps might need a little bit of an explanation for the welfare of the
You're spot
program.
on, Jack. That's exactly what
That's
we're supposed to
all.
do.
I mean, I don't have a problem with $25 increase.
Right.
I just would like to know why, if we're running $1 million, positive variance on actual numbers and 472 on a budget.
Yeah.
And well, we're gonna get to the budget now. Because the other question that I had on the budget
Yeah.
had to do with the expense side. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Basically, what I said was, I wish I would have brought my glasses. At the summary level,
Yeah.
the expenses were under budget by $533,951. $533,951. dollars. Going forward, should we make adjustments to our expense budgeting projections? Because is this an anomaly or has this happened before?
Now, that is a very valid question. That's one I can't answer. That's one that needs to be sent over to John because the Budget Finance Committee
Are
looks
we-
at it and say,
I
hey,
guess-
listen, you know,
Are we under budgeting on revenue and over budgeting on expenses?
Yeah.
I mean, in corporate America, that was the game that was played. You
Sure.
know that.
sure. So again, you're right. You're looking at, your actuals of 14.7 million and the budget of 15.2 million for expenses, and the question is, okay, what did we learn? Because if you look at it, you look at year to date last year, it was 14.2. Okay, so my question would be, and here it is, over considerations for next budget. In other words, again, it goes back to what conditions made the budget say, I'm projecting 15.2 in, expenses when last year actuals was 14.2. And this year, so far, year to date, I spent 14.7. So the question is, what are the conditions that influence that? Was it something that we need to look at? And again, and I'm kind of preempting myself here, but one of the things that I want to have a takeaway is this is the kind of information we need to look at, as I said earlier, when we look at the budget for next year. In other words, that's something I got to look at. Well, gee, overall, we were, whatever it is, 500, over $500,000 worth of, expenses that were far less than what we anticipated. And the question was what didn't we do?
Wages and benefits. You,
Yeah, you look at that, sure, that's,
they're probably gonna say, you didn't fill the job.
yeah, no, agreed. Yeah, and the same thing goes with the services and supplies, which is, 139K over what they budgeted. So, again, if the budget is what Jack, as elegant was, it's a tool. It's a target that we look at and say, until you go through the entire fiscal year and run your operation, you're not really gonna know exactly until you, obviously get the numbers. But, yeah, let's take, we'll
And the
take.
last question I had on this page.
Yep.
As you recall,
I got you.
has to do with, whether or not the new food service individual is gonna impact those numbers on, let's see, my screen just went blank. I hate this thing. God's sake. At the summary level expenses, blah, 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 blah. In reviewing the operating summary, wages and benefits came in higher at 466,292. Services and supplies was up 111,664. All the other categories seem to be in line, at least in my opinion. So my question was, will the new food service have any impact on any of these overages,
In other words, how much of,
wages?
are attributed to the food operation? I'd like to think now it's zero. Okay, but but as of May 1, but it wasn't that way, because remember, we're looking at these, I know it's today's
Right.
May 28th, whatever it is. And we're looking at numbers for April, which still included wages from the previous vendor. So I think the answer to that's another good question. Let's follow it up. I'm assuming that wages and benefits, as far as the food and beverage operation goes, would be zero unless some
I mean,
allocation
from our
from our
perspective.
perspective.
Yeah.
And the question would be, unless there's some sort of allocation to, running the building from a public works perspective. Don't know, but that, there could be some, some costs there, but I tend to believe that, I didn't look at the contract, but, that they're responsible for pretty much, all that operation. So it's a good question. We'll make sure we answer that one.
All right.
Yeah, let me, I want to make sure that. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, I'll shut up the rest of the meeting.
No, you need to participate in the rest of the meeting. I have concerns about people that are too quiet. Okay, anything else on op summary? Somebody could argue that, gee, other costs are down $67,000 on the expense side. Yes, other costs. you know?
Yeah, what's that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, those are like, you know, I talked to Steve Phillips, like insurance payments, stuff like that, you know, kind of fall in there, at what point does something like other costs being broken out into 7 more categories make any difference? You know, because they tend to be smaller amounts, not a big operational aspect. So, personally, unless you see a huge anomaly, other costs are just part of running the operation as far as I'm concerned. All right, next item on our report is tennis. Okay. Comments, questions on that one?
Don't look at me, I'm not.
Are you all talked out?
I'm done. No, I went through it, I mean,
Okay,
and that's what I saw, revenues were up and
Yep.
expenses were controlled.
yep, I looked
You
at
did a
that.
good job on the expense side.
Yeah, member dues revenue was up from last year. And also, if you note, service and supplies and other costs year-to-date numbers as compared to last year, they're lower. Right? On the expense side,
Those are our wages.
yeah. Wages are down too, but I think that was, they didn't have a director at the time for a while,
I'm
throughout the year.
saying that.
Yeah.
The previous discussion, wages seem to be
Yeah.
bulk of.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, but like I said, the services and supplies and other costs year to date, are down, which, to me, that tells me that, they're looking at managing that environment. Interesting question to see would be, with the new building, will any of that change? Is there any more efficiencies, let's say on the utility side? Are there, heating and cooling? I don't know, just, it should be interesting to see how that affects it. It'd be a nice comparison between this year and last year, or this coming year. I'm sorry, this current year and the last fiscal year. Okay, anything else on the tennis one? All right, moving to the next item on the report is pickleball. Had the same comments, remember, revenue up from last year, and both services, supplies, and other cost year-to-date numbers are lower than they were last year.
Without nitpicking.
Yeah.
The
Yeah, oh, this-
utilities,
yeah, let's go back to your spreadsheet right here.
thing is with utilities on both pickleball, if you look at the year to date,
Mm-hmm.
they're over by 200 and 2,456.
Right.
And if you go to platform tennis, they're also over by 2787. So they're over on a year to date by 3,800. $3,800 to combine them. Because when you go back to the other and look at the combined total for the year, the combined total for those activities
Yeah.
is over by $3,800. Is that significant or not? If you look at, when you go back and look at the spreadsheet for utilities year to date.
Yeah.
You're okay. So it's just a matter of
That was the question.
detailed budgeting.
Yeah, you guys got the spreadsheet that Bob created, right?
I got it.
That was the
Yeah.
question I had.
That's very nice, thank you.
And they came back and they said,
So
they
it's,
say that was due to construction.
well, that's what I saw for this month, but when we asked the
That was the
question 2
question.
months ago. Mine is,
Yeah.
you don't want to get in too far into the level of detail. You want to
Right.
look at a big number.
Yeah.
And when you're budgeting, but the concern that I had there is if you looked at the actual run rate or the actual budget, they budgeted less for this year than last year. So what do they know that we don't know?
All right.
When that particular group was over by $3,800. It's not a big number, but
Worthwhile. And yeah, I'm glad you looked at it from a, we tend to separate because of the way the reports are, tend to separate
Yeah.
tennis, pickleball, platform, but when you look at them as a combined environment, just using that facility, it ends up, might warrant some interesting information.
so again, I don't know if it's a concern or not.
Well, and again, my sort of academic curiosity would be that, see these numbers here, then, gee, if we're all still around, next year at this time, I hope so. At the end of the day, we look and say, how to compare it? In other words, did the new building make any difference, after, investing, X amount of dollars in it. Other thoughts, questions, comments? Okay, and then the last part of the task.
No. No, this is very useful.
All right, next one was platform. Same thing as the others. Or anything we've covered, the racket sports, good. Next one is aquatics. Somebody else has to have a comment besides me. Okay, well, then my notes,
Aquatics, go ahead.
I was say, the daily fees are down from last year, but they are better than the budget, okay? But if you look, the utility costs were well below the levels from the previous year. You know, year-to-date numbers. Look at the utilities. So they must have gained some level of efficiency somewhere. I don't know if there was maybe they lowered the water temperature by 2 degrees over, you know, or they turned the air conditioner up or something, or down, or I don't know. But you know, some efficiencies were gained, and you know, again, it's just an interesting number that they've done so well. That, I mean, I think that also contributes to, if you go back to, you know, looking at how well in the overall summary that aquatics did. You know, they were budgeted to lose X amount of dollars. It'd be solely on the expense side, and they're in the black right now, according to year-to-date unaudited. And you know, this is another one of those reasons why, I would assume. All right, any other questions about aquatics? Okay. Combined golf ops.
Their utilities, not nitpicking, are favorable.
Yeah, here's your
9.
10K, 93. Yeah, my note here is, you know, the member dues, if you look at it year to date, are 50,000 better than they were last year. Okay, you know, and same for the cart fees. So again, you know, whether it's level of efficiency, whether the course has now been more pronounced within the golf area, you know,
There's a lot more members.
more members,
You know, a lot more members.
you know,
The ladies are
package
up.
play.
Ladies are up huge. They
Yeah.
had like 20 or 30, they're up to like 80.
Yeah, well, my wife and I are both members, so.
Golf is a real accomplishment compared to, for years,
Yeah,
it was a money hole.
yeah.
People dump the money.
Let's, you know, some people, I know a couple of you guys have been around for a while, the same as me. It's like, remember when they had 9, the whole shut down for maintenance and all that kind of stuff, and
All
Yeah.
kind of problems.
few people,
We rebuilt the greens.
yeah, remember, Billy Casper, you know, and then it was Landscapes Unlimited, and then that was
That was
a disgrace.
No, it wasn't.
You
No,
know,
it wasn't.
they ended up
It
losing.
was totally mismanaged.
Yeah, well, they ended
It
up
was
costing
mismanaged.
us more
Yeah.
money than it was.
Yeah, Casper mismanagement and the other company came in, and tried to straighten it out.
Yeah. But you know, we took it over, and since then, so in other words, that's just one of those things for people that would, you know, forget, oh, we dumped it. Remember, it always wasn't like that. It took a concerted effort to turn it into, you know, putting us on the revenue side rather than the expense side,
I
so.
wasn't aware of all that backstory, but.
Oh, yeah.
Everything I've seen since I've been on this committee, which is almost a year, is golf ops is not something to worry about.
Yeah, no, I don't, what Frank and Jack can attest to, I think Bob too, but can attest to it from back in those days,
Yeah.
I like that's,
We were losing.
Every
We'll
year.
have to keep golf
We,
alive.
we were, at that time, we were losing in aggregate over the last 3 years of Casper Golf being here, about $1.5 million.
For a year.
I mean, net. I'm not talking about gross numbers, I'm talking net.
Who was Casper? Is that?
it was a management company that we had
Yeah.
running the golf course.
And one of the things they did, one of the all Casper's fault, one of the things they did was redo the greens.
It killed them.
And, right,
Yeah.
they redid the green, yeah, somebody down, we don't know
They
who
were
killed them.
overzealous.
They redid the greens, and instead of closing down the course, they opened up 9 holes, so you could only play 9, and then you had to turn around and play the same 9 over again, while they closed down the other 9 to replace
It was pretty bad.
the greens, right?
I assume
And they kept the staff the same, the expenses were the same, everything was the same, except the revenue went way down.
Yeah.
Way down. That took about 2 years,
Better
2.5, 3, 2.
Yeah, that's
Two
what
and a
led,
half years.
that's what led to, bringing Landscapes Unlimited in. Anyway, enough of that. Golf is where it should be right now. We're
Right.
very happy.
No, he's doing a great job. He was
Better,
really-
actually better.
Bob's good man.
Yeah. All right, any other questions on combined golf ops? Now that we've covered the history and. Okay, next report is Clubhouse Grill. You know, again, I guess it was still before the other one took over. I was, gotta tell myself, if you look at, sometimes I just look at it just for pure entertainment. But if you look at the, Clubhouse Grill, the food revenue was down from year to date from last year, but the beverage revenue increased. If you look at that number, they're
Yeah.
not eating as much, but they're drinking more. So I don't know. Not important, just an observation.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on Clubhouse Grill?
Now, with the new management, all those expenses go away, including utilities, everything should be
Right.
gone.
One of the things that I'm going to ask John is what reports should we expect? With regard to the yacht club, beach club, and clubhouse. And probably the answer to that is going to be none.
Right.
Okay, which is fine. I just want to make sure that, all the expectations are set and that we're just looking at a gross number at budgeting time. When it comes to just kind of food, I'm assuming there would be, and again, I'll confirm this, but the idea would be food and beverage operations. Whether he breaks it out into 3 venues, that's his prerogative, and we'll just take the lead from take the guidance from John, see how he wants to do that going forward.
Yeah, so like when the appreciation dinner that they're putting together, they're paying for that, so that's revenue for, the
Touch Italy.
Touch Italy.
Yeah.
And that covers their expense.
Mhm.
So there shouldn't be nothing there.
Okay, anything else? Nothing else on the Clubhouse Grill?
Just a basic thing on all those things. Will we expect to get like a monthly amount of profit each, like, I know it's what, 384,000 or something like that, that they're supposed to.
That's a
Gonna
good
break
question.
that down over a month by month. We'll get one report that'll say, this is how much we get this month, this is how much we get that month,
Yeah,
or how are they gonna do that?
I think it's a good question. The
That's a
question would be,
good
what's the level of relevance to us as a committee? Okay, in other words, if you look at it in, kind of in a very simplistic way, as long as we get our, monthly stipend from Touch of Italy, I hate to say it's the wrong, but it doesn't really matter.
And how does it
That's,
come in?
that's their issue. In other words, it's their, in other words, I would say we have zero influence on that because
Yeah,
it's none of our, really, quite frankly, none of our business. It's their business to run. And we just look at it and say, well, was it, I would assume from a contractual level, we're pretty stable.
we got a certain amount, but that's a guaranteed amount, but then there's also that 5% or whatever.
Yeah,
the
for,
percentage was.
yeah, you can't, food sales, you can't do liquor sales, but you get 6% of the food sales.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, that might
That might
be
be reported.
what reported. So again, goes back to, I'll ask John, what is it that he would expect and what's relevant to the committee? Because I think that's really the only thing that would be, relevant, if you will.
Yes, just how that shows up in our reports, that's all.
That's certainly a more simplistic way of doing it. That was another one that lost a lot of money for a lot of years.
Mhm.
The yacht club.
Yeah, but lost money. yeah.
Lost money for a lot of years.
Oh,
before
yeah.
we had management in there.
Yeah.
Okay,
Again, it was mismanagement.
I'll make a note to add that to our list of questions, okay? Okay, anything else on Clubhouse Grove while we're still there? All right, next item is the Beach Club. Pretty standard, revenue's up a little bit from last year, small increase in expenses, but, overall, it's right on where it was last year, so no real changes per se. Okay. Next item is beach parking.
What's wages and benefits? What's that all about? I don't, is that like sharing? if someone in Public Works has to go over there and do something, so it's charged to that account.
Yeah, I
Or
think,
something like that.
yeah, and some of that is also, having to do with when, Ocean Pines, employees were handling that. But yeah, there's also expenses associated with, like you said, Public Works, things like that. And I'm guessing John, breaks out the wage allocation. In other words, employee X, spent 10% of his time over at the beach
Yeah,
club.
exactly.
10% a number applied to wages and benefits there, and so on and so forth. So, staff allocation,
And again, the food and the stuff that's over there, that's all covered by Touch of Italy,
that
right?
is correct. Again, I would expect
Yeah.
no real
No.
issue other than, to Frank's point, when we look at, what did we, what percentage did we get out of the food sales,
Yeah.
on our side, so.
Yeah.
All right, beach parking, 32,000 year-to-date increase here, so this is more people buying parking passes there, and more people parking there,
Mhm.
so. All right, next item is yacht club. Pretty self-explanatory, what we've been talking about all year. I mean, my note is the revenue's down across the board, but, their expenses year to date were a little bit lower than last year. You know, the yacht club had its, there's a lot of concerns there.
Yep.
I think it drove, where we are right now. Hey, we move forward. I think that, like I said, I don't think we're gonna be getting any more reports, just as would from the clubhouse and the beach club. The yacht club's gonna be the same way. We'll just look at, if it's relevant, what's the, percentage of revenue that we're getting, or what's the amount of revenue we're getting out of that, 6%, food sales thing.
That's all you have, because the rent is fixed and it's spread out.
Yeah. And because we don't own a liquor license, we can't realize any benefit on the alcohol sales, so.
And in that contract, the expenses part of it, are they responsible for all those little, like electricity and all that kind of stuff? Or who's responsible for that? In the.
I believe
deal?
I believe that to be the case, although I want to make sure, because I quite frankly did not look at the contract.
Yeah, I
I
haven't
just,
seen it, so-
I looked at it at a high level, saying from an operational, perspective, it looks good. In other words,
Yeah.
we've limited the amount of, potential,
Downside.
revenue losses downside. And, we've got a consistent stream of income. Okay.
Yeah.
So I didn't really, so I can't answer that, but I think.
What are our expenses?
I know that
Overall.
I know that they are responsible for some of the things internally there,
Mhm.
with regard to, whether it's equipment, things like that, insurance coverages, all of that stuff, so,
Things like building maintenance, that might still be us.
yeah, that's where I'm not sure. I don't know exactly what it is. I don't know how detailed it gets with regard to, I'm guessing the overall maintenance of the building would still be
Yeah.
Ocean Pines, since we're the owner.
It's our facility, so.
Basically leasing the place from us, so. But, yeah, let me find out. That's, I never really thought about that.
The effective date of the new contract is,
It was May 1, but I know that, if you recall, the Matador Company turned over the ownership, like, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks earlier than that, to give them time, to give the Touch of Italy a time to go in and operationalize the building to their standards and their way of doing things. So, now how that shows up on the balance sheet, on expense, I don't know. I think there was something John and everybody worked out okay, and I'm sure it'll show up, in the audited stuff, but, this is the wrong thing to say, really not that interested, in that, because I'm sure there's some transition costs that happened, a payout, and for the end of the contract, I don't know, some money in kind for, construction in progress, for the yacht club, things like that. So, but, yeah, I don't know exactly, but
It looks like on here that they're showing, well, last year to date, it was 55,000 for maintenance, so we're still gonna have that expense. If that falls on us, and then out of that basic amount that we're gonna get, we're still gonna be in for 55,000 or some amount similar to that for maintenance. Utilities is a question mark as to who pays that. I would think they would pay the service supplies and wages, benefits would be on them. And other costs, we don't know what that is. But it's a big number, $600,000.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good, we'll need, I think, getting a, copy of the contract, or at least getting, some of the highlights for the contract would be helpful. I've
Who's
made a
responsible
note,
for what? That's. what
yes,
it's-
I made a note to do that. Again, it goes back into budgeting for next year too.
Yeah.
You know? Any other notes on the, yacht club? Okay, next item is the marinas. No comments required, right? I should remind you, operating is expected. All right. Reserves. Next item is reserves. We had a $7.1 million balance at the end of the last fiscal year, and we now have a $6.2 million balance at the end of this fiscal year, unaudited. But you know, I guess I'm not really, my question, and I made a note here, is that, you know, if you look at what was the budget said that we were gonna have a balance of, the FY 24-25 approved budget had,
Right.
you know, balance of 6.02 at the end of, you know, this fiscal year. So we're a little bit ahead, you know, by a couple $100,000 on where we are in the reserves. And, you know, to me, that's the most fluid thing, you know, with regard to between, you know, replacement costs, drainage, bulkheads, you know, and new capital was, you know, very little, but, you know, as far as reserves go, the only, I don't want to call it concern, but the only curiosity I have is when this new, reserve study is done, you know, what is going to be the commitment, or I guess the better word, what is going to be the requirement that Ocean Pines needs to meet in order to ensure that is covering, you know, the X percentage of his asset base. So, Jackie, question?
No, I'm paying attention. No, you know, as far as the reserves are concerned, I don't know if that's high, low, or, I mean, we've gone from 7 million to 6.2 million. I mean, looks pretty good to me.
Yeah,
Somewhere in here it ought to show up the contribution, well, that 1 point whatever million that we ended up in overage in the operating budget. Part of that had to go into here.
well,
I'm just looking to find out where it came in. Or how much did they take from that overage?
Okay, if
Put
you look-
into the capital.
if you look at page
Yeah,
2,
Yeah,
if you look
that's
at
right.
page 2 of this monthly report, you know, operating account summary, the budgeted surplus transfer, $913. Sorry, $913,000.
Virtually all of it.
Only a step over.
Yeah, yeah, that was,
Virtually
you can remember,
Which is a
that was
good
the
thing.
actuals after the audit from last year. So it doesn't get transferred. So if you look, you know, it got transferred, the actuals got transferred, and it's on the revenue side of $913,000, okay? And of that, of the total amount of revenue, if you look at the next line, you know, they transferred $3.8 million to the reserve accounts, spread it across the reserve accounts of placement, bulkhead, roads, drainage, and new capital.
That explains the other question we had as to what happened to that overage.
Right. Yeah, no, that's easily tracked. That's
You
not a question there. So reserves, like I said, the only thing that we're looking for, kind of feedback from John. I think he said it's supposed to be in November is when they're going to do this, new reserve study. So I think that, and again, you know, I know that by law now we have to have, you know, a reserve study done every 5 years, I believe, and we're well in compliance. But this will be year 4, something like that. So, you know, he's got it scheduled. Question is, how much will change? You know, I'm looking at not only, you know, useful life, but, you know, what percentage you know, and I don't know the law on this one, but, other than we have to have it every 4 years, but are they stating a specific percentage of your asset base? And I think the answer to that is no, because I haven't heard anything from
There is
the
no.
But, oh, you did good. So at the end of the day, you know, we should, you know, unless finance, you know, or we want to look at it and say, well, maybe we advise the board to say, well, you know, just to be on the safe side, we push it up a little bit and, you know, maybe making a recommendation that, you know, some of the overage is surplus when it's actualized, you know, be put specifically in the reserves. But, you know, we'll you know, we'll see how that goes.
Zach had a good question. He's, I don't know whether this is good or bad. Does that reserve study tell you what you should carry?
Yes, yes. I don't know if it's actually out on the website and they do a projection of, you know, basic asset base and, they're using the cash flow method. So they're looking at exactly what planned expenses are, you know, where the balance should be and what percentage of your asset base is covered by your reserve funds. So they're looking and they're charting that all the way out. They got it all the way out to 2047. So I've looked at that and kind of going, okay, so I looked at it. The reason I remember 24/7, there was something, I think that's where our expenses outweighed our reserve fund, 2047. So, you know, am I gonna worry about that right now? No. Okay, no.
Has a reserve study been budgeted this year?
Good question. I don't know.
I don't
I
remember
don't
seeing it.
know. I don't know.
Does this committee get involved in that in any way?
No, it's a third party, you know.
No, I know that.
Yeah,
But, you know, my experience has been in the past, the board was primarily
right.
the driver and also received the information. I don't know how much information budget and finance receive with the final product.
Well, I don't think it hurts for us to ask when the report is done, if we can get a copy of it. Yeah, I mean, it's not confidential information. It's, you know,
No.
it's public information. The idea would be it would help us, you know, maybe better
Through the pro-
understand.
As I recall, and I'm just going back with memory, through the process, there were questions that were raised
Mhm.
by the company that was RMA,
DMA,
DMA.
Yeah.
That was doing the you know, the study, and they would ask questions, you know, about this, that, and the other thing. That's where I'm coming from, you know.
yeah, again,
And the Budget and Finance Committee, I don't believe they were involved at that
Yeah, I
particular point.
don't know for sure.
I don't either.
think so, but, hey, it's worth asking.
Yeah.
You know, to say, you know, it's like, you know, the answer would be yeah, or no, not necessary. Okay. You know, at the end of the day, I would encourage everybody to get a copy of the reserve study report.
For sure.
So we understand these numbers and can actually kind of, you know, rationalize the numbers that are on this summary report to the actual details, you know, of our asset base.
And that gives you a better appreciation for what the reserves are
Yeah.
once you look at
Yeah.
the study and.
Yeah, where you used to life going, okay,
Yeah.
what's my depreciation going to be? Okay, reserves. Yeah, you know, it's just, we're fine, there's no issues, it's just a question of, you know, what that new reserve study's, gonna do to the numbers.
Did you make a note on the question whether it's budgeted for this year?
Oh,
Reserve study.
thank you. Okay, the next item are the capital expenses.
Bottom right corner, is that for the table they have? The line, total replace new cap reserve. Here did the actual was
Yeah,
significantly. Budgeted.
yeah. Yeah, and if you look at it, so if you look right down below that, what? Look under Public Works, about 3/4 of the way down, you see seed drill, quote unquote, new cap. Does that mean new capital? Okay,
I would think.
yeah, and the question would be,
New cap.
so, you know, and I see another one here, radios, new cap, okay? But if you add that up, you know, there's not too many others that say new, matter of fact, I think those are the only two that say new cap. And the question is, what, 9,300 and, so you're talking about $13,000 worth of new cap. The rest of it was, replacement and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And if you looked at the, here's my only question, this is where I kind of like, if you looked at the budget from FY 24, 25, there was 1.5 million worth of capital expenses that were budgeted. And it had a whole list of them. You can pull up the budget report, you can see all that. And I'm trying to figure out, where, how that matches up to this report right here. We're summarizing all of it. I mean, it shows up, if you look under where you look at, Randy, the total replacement new cap reserve, FY budget 1.526. Okay. So that's consistent with what the budget was, because I went back and looked at the budget report, it's the exact same number. All right. But what they actually spent, is what, 1.52 million higher than what we did, which is fine, but the question would be the unplanned expenses. One at a time, guys. Unplanned expenses, were they, things that came up, so on and so forth. This,
Bad estimating.
well, I don't want to necessarily say that. I've found that there's always pretty much an explanation for things. But the question is, maybe it's just me, I can't find, if I'm assuming that this is the entire list of purchases, for this year, and I can't find the 1.5 new capital here, So my question would be, what made up that,
Yeah.
because if you look, that, the total is 3.04, which is what, what was spent, okay? So in other words, show me where the 1.5 is in this 3.049 number. So we can break out, my note is, we can break out what was capital, what was replacement,
The big one is irrigation.
Yeah, but that comes out of replacement, because that's an existing asset. Okay, so that's not new capital.
So,
Yeah, so the question would be that's my question is, where, if we're looking at the 1.5 of new capital, help me understand where that is in this list. Again, under the assumption that this is the entire list of all capital purchases that were made this fiscal year.
I told you I had to come back.
There you go. Okay. How about,
Apple, because I see one for the police radios, new cap.
Yeah.
There's not much there.
Is that the same?
yeah, same one,
Okay,
new cap,
okay, all right. That's what I-
9303, that's what I'm looking at.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, all right. So any other questions on capital expense? I think, that's gonna be a question that we send to the finance team. And I say, help us understand where that, it's there somewhere. Maybe they just didn't, put new cap next to everything that was really new cap. All right. Move on to the balance sheet. I only had one item, the allowance for bad debt.
Same one
Yeah, is up, what, with $38,000. The question is, I just wanna, what we haven't had in a long time, and we used to produce, was a delinquency report. The question would be, I'd like to think we should request a delinquency report, and then get some guidance from finance as to why the allowance for bad debt, has increased by 38,000. Is it something that, there was more people not paying for their assessments and, this, that, and the other thing? So it's probably more informational than anything. Again, not a problem per se, just informational to say, was there anything from, as an advisory committee to the board, one of the things we might look at to say, ask them to consider options if we can come up with some, with regard to that. So, any other questions on the balance sheet?
The only problem is that it goes up. It hasn't gone down.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. The only other note that I had, I'm sorry, go back up. The next item is cash. And that's there's 17 million out there. in between CDARS, Taylor Bank, Bank of Ocean City, and other, accounts,
Yeah.
financial vehicles. And the last item is the membership report. Ready?
Racket Sports, the total membership, number of membership
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
is down 30%. 24.
yeah.
Is that hopefully not because of the new structure of billing?
So, yeah, this is kind of one of those fluid numbers. At the end of the day, is that when that change in the rate structure went into place, when was that? It was May 1?
That's what I'm wondering.
It was May 1.
New year.
Right,
Okay.
so these
We
numbers
don't know yet.
are representative of the rate structure from last year,
Right.
which I believe they had like two options. Was it, I don't know, well, single sport and multi-sport? I don't play racket, I don't know. I should know this, but there's a decrease in that. So I think from a kind of a high level perspective, one could look at it and say, the folks who are interested in racket sports, have kind of an aversion to the pricing structure now. And it should be interesting to see how that number changes even further with the new pricing structure. I guess it's a single structure that went into play on May 1.
Yeah, all the other memberships went up. That's the only one that went down.
Yeah,
And that's a big one.
yeah,
That's 30%.
yeah.
Less.
Yeah, so the question would be, what's done is done. The board passed, that particular rate structure. So at the end of the day, it's just more like monitoring it, it's not up to us to promote and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, we just, kind of let the board know that, we've noticed this downturn in the membership of the racket and kind of maybe watch it and see if there's, if there's any reason to relook at it again for the following fiscal year for budget prep time. I mean, I don't look at it as an action item right now, it's more just informational at this point.
It's just a good one. I mean,
When the action item.
the naysayers, when they have
Yeah.
lots.
It would be an action item to ask
Yeah.
what's happening. Down that much.
Well,
Or you expect them to say the new fee.
I mean, if somebody asked me that question, I'd say obviously there's less interest. There's your answer.
And
you
the
know,
solution is.
Yes, and at the end of the day, well, there's a solution in place already, which not necessarily the solution, there's a condition in place already that I think warrants us just to keep an eye on it. Because there's nothing we can do to change it at this point. So I mean, to kind of be a rough response to your question, well, there's nothing I can do about it right now. Okay, we until next year. So that's why I say look at it from a monitoring perspective and say, hey, when you do a 6-month forecast, where are we with memberships 6 months from now? And say, is that something that needs to be considered, when it comes to the budget? Because remember, we started looking at budget stuff in September, right?
Yeah.
And we'll, one of the things that we'll look at is these monthly reports come out and say, let's look at, exactly where we are as far as membership goes. And then that goes the same for the rest of the ones,
Well, I mean, so you're assuming that membership is down because of the rate?
I'm not making any assumption. It could be lost bitches. It could be people moved out of the area. 10 of those folks that played tennis no longer live in Ocean Pines. I don't know. There's all kinds of potential. Or they just decided that, their buddies play over in Ocean City, so we decided this year we're going to go play with them. I mean, it could be any number of reasons. So, in any event,
Still 14 members left, huh?
14 lifetimes.
14 left, man.
We're hanging in. Getting older, but we're hanging
are you, Frank, lifetime?
in. Lifetime.
Yeah.
No.
No?
Good deal, I tell you.
I'll tell you what, I wish I'd have known about that one a long time ago. Anyway, yeah, you guys know, we're talking about the lifetime golfers.
I
Yeah.
figured
That
it
was,
was.
that was back in what, Tom?
2013 is when we had the chance to do
You had the opportunity to buy.
God.
it. So it's,
That was before I got involved in all this stuff.
yeah.
Remember what happened?
Oh, I would have, are you kidding me? I would have paid it, said lifetime membership, baby, I'm good.
And we're done.
All right, we're kind of getting off track here. So I only had one other item though. Any questions with the membership report? Because we'll monitor the back board. Well, and then we'll monitor all of them as we go forward to see how that cost structure changed anything. And then the only other thing I had was, this is one I want to kind of pose to John and the finance team, is that if you go back up to the capital summary report, okay? And the one where it lists specifically all the things.
What report?
Capital summary, okay? Matter of fact, this one, Jack. Can you find it? About 3 pages back from the end of the report.
I see it.
Okay, so look over at Racket Sports. And one of the items there is building renovation, 99,543. Okay? And at the GM report from this last board meeting, John estimated that the cost is probably closer to 275. So my question is that extra cost going to be billed retro to this fiscal year, or is it going to be pushed into next to show up in this current fiscal year?
I know the reason for that.
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about. It's more like where because
where it's gonna
we're
end
going.
up.
Yeah, I don't want to forget it 6 months from now when we go, oh, why did that 200,000 show up? Where'd that come from? The idea is like, is the expense going to get booked back to FY 24, 25, or is that expense going to be carried in 25, 26?
They may not have paid that money yet.
Yeah, it was construction in
Because-
progress, right? So
Yeah,
treated
it's
as
sort of in the middle.
yeah.
They did some of it already, which looks like he built it into this budget, and then there'll be additional
Okay.
payments later on based on the extra work that they had to do to complete the
Okay,
project.
so it sounds like it's going to get spread across
Should
2
be spread
fiscal
the
years.
next
Okay.
year.
That's all. It's just
That's my
again,
guess, but I-
yeah, just a question. I asked John, it's like, because his expense shows up, so wait a minute, I thought that was last year. The answer is, okay, we're only booking 99,000 of that expense in the fiscal 24, 25.
Yeah,
All right, and then the balance will be budgeted and expensed in 25, 26.
that's what I think.
Okay, all right. So, any other questions, comments, concerns on the budget report? All right, moving on to the next item on our agenda is a report on the questions from that we posted to the finance team. For those who watch this or sitting here at the meeting, we did it by email since we didn't have a meeting last month because at the time the reports hadn't been presented, but there was really no real issue. We were kind of focusing on the end of the year, so there's only 2 questions. And the first question was, utilities and platform tennis and pickleball are well above for the year. Is this simply straight line budgeting or some other unforeseen conditions? And then the answer was utilities are up due to construction of the Racket Center building. Okay. All right. And then the second and final question was, at the Beach Club, there was a vendor rebates line item of $6,652. What was that? And the answer is credit received from the liquor transfer. So they got answered. We'll certainly include these in the Randy, if you want, we're gonna include that in the minutes. Okay. Okay, excellent. All right. Next item on the agenda is general comments from committee members. Any questions? The floor is open. Jack got all talked out. Okay, well, if nothing for the good of the order. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So move.
Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. In Robert's Rules of Order, I believe there is no discussion on a motion to adjourn. You can't, the cadence of, motion, second, discussion,
Right.
vote. It's motion, second, vote. There's no discussion on adjournment, which kind of makes sense. It's like, well, no, I want to stay here and talk to you guys for a little while longer.
Hey, thanks, everyone. Have a good
Yes.
rest.
Thanks,
of
Mike. Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.